All right. I think we'll get going. It's 4:03. So I wanted to first introduce my two lovely bosses, David Haynes and Scott McCallum. We work at WisACT, the Wisconsin Alliance for Civic Trust, and I'm also here with Lydia Boyce, who planned this wonderful event and who is our intern at WisACT. It's a pleasure to have you all. Thank you all for making the time to come today. I wanted to give David and Scott a second to just talk a little bit about what we do at WisACT if you're unfamiliar with us and tell you where to find us, and then we'll jump right into our panel. So David and Scott, welcome. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, great. Thanks for organizing, Allison, and Lydia. Great job. I think using the term "lovely" to describe Scott and I might be a stretch, but thank you for that anyway. So the Wisconsin Alliance for Civic Trust is almost a year old. We formed it in late April of last year. Scott, of course, is a former governor of Wisconsin. I'm a former journalist with the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Scott is a right-leaning lead for this project, and I'm a left-leaning lead, which is how each of these democracy resilience networks that are supported by the Carter Center are organized. And what we are is a civic network, a group of citizens, Republicans and Democrats alike, who are focused on building trust in our institutions. And particularly in the last year, we've worked a lot around building trust in elections and voting. We've done that in any number of ways. We did listening sessions last summer. We followed that up with some de-escalation trainings around the state, including at UW-Madison. And we've continued to build our network and do monthly meetings like this one that are informative and engaging, hopefully, and educational. And so, Scott, let me turn it to you to add a few facts.
Well, let me just share and thank you, David, and thank everybody, the panelists, but others who have joined this because it's the topic is to discuss occupations and working in the democracy square. But the fact is, anybody getting involved can contribute. And in fact, it requires people to become involved in a system such as democracy. And if people don't get involved, as you say, it's the sure way to lose a democracy. One of the important aspects of democracy that we've worked on and continue to is to have civility in discussions, to understand that people can differ in opinion and have different approaches to issues, and care about them deeply. But it doesn't mean that we need to break into tribes in the U.S. or elsewhere to get to that point. That civility and discussion are an important part of democracy as well. So it's going to be an interesting. Dana, we've got some wonderful panelists. And again, thank you, panelists, for joining us. Those that are looking at occupations in democracy or democracy building, I think you're going to see how widespread it is. And I can think of, Nathan will talk about some of the things of internationally, but David and I working in this square now of democracy building and and uh, and allowing civility in a system is we see it in the U.S., but there are international occupations that pertain to it. I mean, I'm thinking back even in the political arena, each of the political parties in D.C. have international groups. And Nathan, you may want to touch on those. I'll tell you one of the things that really made me a real believer that I wanted to share with everyone when I came back was when the Sandinistas and Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua had taken over. I was led part of the group, which led the group to Nicaragua to monitor the first elections ever, and to see somebody who had rode her horse for half a day to get to the polling place to vote for the first time and go back what it means to people. Or one place who said, well, you can't close down the polling place. There's still, the time isn't up. And they said, well, everybody has voted except for this guy who's off visiting a family in another community and another person who's everybody but two people had voted. and to see the meaningfulness of a democracy for the first time. We're in it and we don't fully appreciate it sometimes. And we can see sometimes the frustration now with when it starts to break down with civility. But thank you so much for yours. And I just wanted to give a shout out a couple of people I noticed on here of occupations you may not even think about our democracy building. David Blaska, who's an influencer and covers these things and influencing people on social media, and Sam Larson, who's here working on local government and studying local government and how it can become more efficient. And there are many others on here. So thank you very much for participating, for caring about democracy, for being a part of this.
Thank you so much, Scott, and thank you, David. Yeah, now we're going to transition to introducing the panelists. Each panelist is going to give a little introduction about who they are and what they do and how they got into the pro-democracy sphere. Also, we're going to have a Q&A at the end, so if any questions arise, keep track of them because your questions are valuable and we will touch on them at the end. Okay, so I think we're going to get started with Mary Beth Collins.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much to WisACT for inviting me to be a part of this with these amazing professionals who are also working in the pro-democracy space. I've placed in the chat a link to the website for the Civic Health of Wisconsin initiative, which is sort of administratively hosted by the Center for Community and Nonprofit Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And that's where I serve as the executive director at that center. And we kind of help facilitate the Civic Health of Wisconsin initiative, which is the overlap that I have in the pro-democracy space in my work. I'm going to share just very briefly here about my educational background, which was one of the specific things that they wanted us to share about, especially for those undergrads in the meeting today. So I got my undergraduate degree in English education at Appalachian State University after a very adventurous early, like teenage and early 20s time that included some time off and going abroad and going to Alaska and living in California, transferring a couple of times. And then eventually I went to law school at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I got a dual degree in Latin American studies. Both of those graduate degrees were inspired by the things that I kind of observed in my early 20s related to the times that I was living in. 9/11 had just happened right when I started law school, when I applied to law school, essentially. And I had been spending a lot of time teaching as an ESL instructor with the many new residents in the United States from Latin America. And I had learned a lot from some inspiring professors about the relationship of the United States in Latin America. And so that's kind of how I sought out this dual degree program back in my home state of Wisconsin. And part of the reason for the adventurousness was that I'm proudly from La Crosse. I love La Crosse with all my heart. But when I was 18, I wanted to go see what else was out there. So I came back and I've been happily and proudly doing my work here ever since. I did some traditional roles as an attorney, and then I became an executive director of a small regional nonprofit organization. I had gained a passion for the NGO and nonprofit sector, including from my thesis research in Buenos Aires, Argentina, where I looked at judicial reform. So you can see how broad these influences were on my ultimate, like now beautiful merger of things that I get to work on today. And I didn't know along the way in those early days that that I would lead, these things would lead to me being at a university, teaching, researching, doing outreach around the NGO sector and civil society and democracy. But I'm very happy to report that that somehow did occur. And I will pass it on to the next person. And I can dig in on more in future questions if that's of interest, but I want to be mindful of time. And I think the next person is Nathan.
Yes, thank you so much, Mary Beth. Okay, Nathan, if you want to jump in.
Sure. Thanks, Mary Beth. Thanks to David, Scott, Lydia, Alice, and the whole team for pulling us all together. It's great to be with all of you. A lot of what Mary Beth said resonated with me as well. I am not from Wisconsin. I am from a town too small for traffic lights in upstate New York. And by the time I was 18, I really wanted to go other places. In the mid 1990s, I got a bachelor's degree in international relations from Colgate University. I was not one of those kids who changed my major 9 times. I never changed my major because I was dead certain at 18 that I wanted to go out far away from the US and do other things in other countries. What TBD? And in fact, much of my career until relatively recently was international in focus. I lived in the Gaza Strip in my early to mid 20s as an English teacher during one of the previous wars between Israelis and Palestinians. I went on to spend a lot of years working to resolve conflicts in the Middle East, working for the Carter Center and former President Carter. I worked in Afghanistan for a couple of years in the mid-aughts, but in a circuitous way, which we can talk more about, that eventually led me to the work that I've been doing in the US, including with the great WisACT team, to try to resolve conflicts and strengthen democracy in the United States. So I have been in my current role as an associate director for conflict resolution for the Carter Center, working on America for about 4.5 years now. And in that role, I'm working with networks like WisACT and similar cross-partisan civic networks in 5 other states to help organize our fellow Americans to strengthen democracy. So we can talk more about that, but I would just echo Mary Beth and Scott, in saying that there's a lot of important lessons that can be learned from the many, many other countries that have faced challenges that are analogous to the ones our country is facing now. And I try to bring that to the work I do in the US. Thank you.
Wonderful introduction. Now we're gonna move on to Sam Liebert.
Hey everyone, can you hear me okay? Awesome. Well, hey everyone, good afternoon. Again, my name is Sam Liebert, where I'm currently serving as the Wisconsin State Director for All Voting is Local. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that's committed to ensuring equitable access to the ballot box and protecting voter rights across the state and the country. I guess, yeah, my educational background began at the University of Wisconsin-Rock County, a 2-year campus in my hometown of Janesville. I eventually transferred to UW-Whitewater, where I earned my bachelor's degree in public administration and policy. I later earned a master's in public administration from UW-Milwaukee, and I'm also a graduate of UW Green Bay's Clerk Treasurer Institute. In addition to my educational background, in my 20s, I had the incredible honor of working on President Barack Obama's first campaign, starting out in Iowa and steadily advancing in leadership roles as I went state by state during the primaries. By the 2008 general election, I was in Florida serving as a senior advisor, helping to drive out the historic voter turnout in a critical swing state. For those old enough to remember, Florida used to be a swing state. After the campaign, I joined the Obama administration as the deputy White House liaison to the Department of Agriculture, where I got to work with my old boss, Tom Vilsack, who was the governor of Iowa. Mr. McCallum may have worked with him. And so my time in the administration really gave me firsthand experience and love for navigating policy and advocating for communities, especially rural communities, being from Wisconsin. So yeah, these experiences, from grassroots organizing to public service at the federal, state, and local levels really have all shaped my commitment to strengthening our democracy. And so, yeah, I'm just thrilled and thankful for WisACT for holding this event today. And, I'm really looking forward to discussing how we can build a more inclusive and resilient electoral system, and looking forward to the conversation. And with that, I think Edgar is up next. Thanks again so much.
Hey everyone, I am Edgar Lin. I work at a group called Protect Democracy, and I'm the policy strategist and counsel, so I lead Wisconsin's work for policy advocacy and litigation, and we're focused on preventing election subversion. what that means is election subversion is an authoritarian tactic aimed at corrupting elections by preventing the true winner from taking office. So that's kind of like my bucket of work. And we'll talk more about that later. But in terms of my education, I went to the UW Law School. I did my undergraduate at Rutgers University. And for my undergraduate, I actually majored in economics, focused on international economics, and I minored in political science because I know there's a lot of students here. So after college, I actually worked in finance for a global investment bank. So a little different path. And I was sent to Hong Kong and Tokyo first and I stayed there for less than a year. I knew I wanted to go to law school. Finance isn't something I'm super passionate about, but it was kind of the route I was going. And what I was very passionate about was my poli-sci minor. When you go to classes and you're excited, there's that professor and you just want to hear what they're saying. I go to my econ class, I'm half asleep most of the time. There's one professor that was really great, and that was great. And so I knew that's what I wanted to do. And then when I went to law school, in undergrad, I took a legal philosophy class, and that just blew my mind. And I totally opened up this whole avenue I wanted to explore. And so I went to law school. I went to law school and I became a public defender. I was a public defender. Some may say it was a form of moral atonement from my finance job. I say not no. But so my legal career started as a public defender. I felt like I was going to be a career public defender. I was there for 7.5 years before leaving. And in between, I took a little break and ran for state representatives. And I know Sam ran for stuff too. So I ran for state representative. I thought I knew a lot of things. I was like a 5th-year public defender representing hundreds of people. I thought I had some glimpse. My younger self had a glimpse of what the problems were. So that person ran for office. I don't know if I would do it now. So and I'll tell you more about Protect Democracy later. I will pass it to, I believe, Peter.
Thanks, Edgar. Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here with you all. Thank you so much for inviting me to join. My name is Peter Skopek. I'm the advocacy director at an organization called Secure Democracy. We're a nonpartisan group that does mostly legislative advocacy work across the country. Our goal is to increase confidence in elections. So to do that, we work on policies that protect voter access and strengthen election security. And happy to talk more about that later as well. I'm based in Madison. My educational background, I did my undergraduate at Northwestern University, just outside Chicago, and studied political science, international studies, and French. But what was really formative about that experience was getting into community organizing. So worked on a local environmental effort there. And it was, again, just a really impressive and interesting and different experience from anything that I was doing in the classroom. And that made me want to do organizing and advocacy work after graduating. So that's the path that I took. I worked for a number of different nonprofit organizations, doing a lot of student organizing on college campuses in New Jersey first, and then came to Wisconsin and was the state director for a nonpartisan nonprofit here that worked on environmental issues, climate policy, consumer protection, student voter engagement. And so I was the state director there for about 6 years. After that, I took a bit of a break and went back to graduate school. So I did a master's in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. And that was kind of coincided with the pandemic. So it was kind of a good time to reset and get a better understanding of what I really wanted to do with my career next. But really the experience just reaffirmed for me that advocacy work is where I want to be right now. And so getting to work on elections policy, election administration in the democracy space here with a lot of the groups that are on this call, a lot of the folks who are on this call has been really wonderful. And so I've been in my position here since 2022. And excited to be here with you all and to talk more and learn more from all of you as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for those introductions. It's very informative. Now we're going to move on to our first question. I think we'll go in the same order as we did before. So we'll be starting with Mary Beth. The first question to consider is what inspired you to enter the pro-democracy sphere? How does your organization work to improve democracy? And maybe consider providing brief explanations for any unfamiliar terminology to outsiders. Give as many details as you'd like.
And I think a really cool part about this panel is we've got some very varied experiences. So you'll be hearing a lot of different ways that you can enter this space for students or those who are curious. So thanks. We'll start off again with Mary Beth.
Great. Well, it's an interesting thing to think about. When did I enter the democracy sphere, or how? And I think much like my discussion of my more precise educational experiences and jobs indicates, it was all an iterative process. But I was lucky enough to be raised in a household with parents that cared a lot about what was going on in the world. And I remember being a kid and going to vote with my parents, or even doing some canvassing and things like that. So I think it's important to emphasize that you don't have to have a job in this stuff to be involved. And I think well before I had a real job, other than, well, they were all real jobs, but well before I had sort of the stuff I put on my resume today, when I was probably just being a roller skating car hop in lacrosse or something, I was doing volunteer kind of things and being involved in things. I remember being a part of the Amnesty International group in high school, things like that. So that's important to note. And I think I always cared deeply about the stories of democracy, American history. The more that I learned about global history, I cared deeply about these things. But when I really started thinking about it, I think as more of a career path was, like I mentioned before, I was kind of at this crossroads where I was certified to teach high school English. I was a newly single mom, and I was needing to figure out a next move. And I decided to apply to law school. Some of the reasoning for that was personal. Like, I needed to buy myself a few years before I put my kids in daycare and went back to work or whatever. And I thought that getting a law degree would probably give me some options that had autonomy as a professional, that I could support my family with, but have flexibility. So these are the sorts of practical things sometimes we have to think about. But it was also at a time when 9/11 had just happened. And when I started law school, one of the cases we were really looking at was Bush v. Gore. So for those to whom that history is a little bit vague, 9/11 was a rattling moment for people that were alive and near adulthood at the time. We didn't really think about the United States being vulnerable in that way. And it led us into a series of changes in some of our civil rights protections that I had an instinct about, that I was very concerned about. And I just wanted to even go to school to know more about that so that I could really understand it. And I didn't end up going and being a lawyer doing that stuff per se, but it did help inspire me to get into the legal field. Bush v. Gore was a Supreme Court decision whereby the Supreme Court got involved in making a decision about the validity of a very specific set of election characteristics. And that really challenged a lot of people's thinking about when is it appropriate for the courts to get involved with election administration. So these were big questions about how strong are our systems? How safe is our democracy? How safe is our country? Are we willing to protect each other according to the Constitution, even when we're threatened? So I went to law school. I got the master's degree in Latin American studies. And then I spent time in Latin America, where a lot of these assumptions look very different. I think, what happened after that was, although I was very intellectually turned on about all these things and got the chance to feel more expert in the themes, I then worked as a lawyer in a law firm because I had to kind of do something very practical. But I was very fortunate that when I did work as a lawyer in a law firm, I was able to do some work with tax-exempt organizations. And these are both the organizations that do charitable work in our communities, the nonprofits you think of, but also they're often the organizations that are doing big money, like advocacy stuff as well. So I learned a lot about like the third sector of charitable work and political work during that time. And having that expertise in the legal side of that was really satisfying to me, actually. But I eventually wanted to do stuff more in the nonprofit sphere. So I became an executive director of a nonprofit. And then and that really wasn't democracy oriented at all. It was dealing with vulnerable families in the court system, which, if you really want to get intellectual about it or broad about it, is related. But I wasn't working on democracy issues in that job. But what I knew from that work was that I kind of wanted to pivot back to like the broader notion of the nonprofit sector. And that's where I started to explore opportunities at the University of Wisconsin. And I got involved in a program at the University of Wisconsin that prepares people to be nonprofit leaders, community organizers. And that's actually the same school that I work at. So I have been teaching students about these things. I've been developing courses about these things. And I've actually been able to really look more creatively at the way that the nonprofit sector is also much of civil society. And civil society is what, from kind of the outside of the government, holds the government accountable and maintains democracy from a more community-based level. So now in my job at the Center for Community and Nonprofit Studies, I get to do teaching, research, and outreach related to those issues. And then through our Civic Health of Wisconsin initiative, we're able to report on how do Wisconsinites behave around those kinds of civil society, civic participation, civic health issues. And I can explain that further if you'd like. But we also kind of like create spaces where people that are not necessarily doing direct democracy work or litigation or political work can convene and share about things that they're doing on the ground that help build that civic health ecosystem from a more community-based level. So churches that are doing this work, or small grassroots organizations that are helping to get out the vote, or media organizations that are trying to get young people to discern information better. So there's lots of different factors that go into civic health, but it's a great merger of my interest in the third sector and communities and the way that those things can support democracy, and in fact must support democracy. Like, the best laws on the books will only go so far if the human beings living in the communities think that the government is trustworthy and are willing to participate in ways that will continue to support democracy. And that's what we're trying to work on.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. Now we're going to pivot over to Nathan.
Thanks. That's really well put, Mary Beth. So in terms of what inspired me to get into this line of work, as I alluded to, going back to being a college student, I was always interested in working abroad. I had an opportunity to work in Palestine in the early 2000s during a war between Israelis and Palestinians. And that sparked a real interest in not just working outside the US, but specifically understanding armed conflicts. Why do people harm each other at scale? Why do societies go to war? Why do peace agreements fall apart? And that became an abiding passion of mine through multiple jobs over multiple years. But at some point, when many of us started to see various signs of democracy backsliding in the United States, I became personally motivated to find a way to do work similar to what I used to do in Syria in my own country, because I believed that at least some of my knowledge and experience was transferable. There are, for example, assessment tools to evaluate the potential for a society to devolve into armed conflict. US diplomats use them when they're evaluating Bolivia, right? These things are out there. I was schooled in some of these methodologies, and I wanted to begin to apply these kinds of analytical frameworks to the United States, and then figure out, as you're unpacking the problem, finding solutions, right? So, certainly by 2016, 17, I became really motivated to figure that out. And I think part of it was inevitably very personal. Like, I'm from America, not Canada. I'm from here. This is my home. And because I spent quite a number of years living in conflict zones. In those years, I derived a profound awareness of my privilege, that wherever I was and whatever risks I may have been taking, like I was an outsider to this thing, this really awful reality that people in this country or territory are stuck in. I got real lucky. I wasn't dealt this hand of cards. I'm not stuck in this place. I can go home to America where this isn't happening. And I think at some very personal level, as I saw those risk factors rising in my home country, it was deeply motivating to figure out what I could do to help out. And so here I am, and so excited to work with all of you.
Thank you so much. I'm loving all this insight. It's getting me fired up and inspired. All right, moving on to Sam.
Yeah, thank you for that, Nathan. I'm also, yeah, it's so neat to hear everyone's story of how they got to where they're at. Yeah, for me, it's sort of a mix of things, similar to what Mary Beth talked about. I mean, I was raised in a single parent household, but by a state employee who, really, I think, invested in my brother and I the importance of voting, and seeing that grow up and know that that needs to be a part of life, being a citizen in this country. I think really defining moment for me, I mean, obviously, as I talked about, I got my start in partisan politics, but really my love for government and democracy came at the local level. I was working in Milwaukee on a governor's race in 2010, and I had met a lot of the politicians in Milwaukee, and I thought, wow, I can do that. And so I ended up moving back home to Janesville, and I saw some similar people who reminded me of those people that I wasn't really impressed with. And I ran for city council. I was 25. Um, I didn't know too much, but I ended up winning. I knocked out a long-term incumbent on my hometown city council. I was reelected 2 more times, eventually left office as council president in Janesville. In Janesville, we don't have a mayor. We have a city council manager form of government. So the city council president is sort of the de facto mayor and works with the city manager and the council on issues. And really, that's where I got my love of local government. It's nonpartisan in Wisconsin, which I love. I always think, there's no Republican or Democratic way to pick up the garbage. There's just the right way. And so I've really taken that with me through the years, that, most solutions are somewhere in the middle, and no one party or person has all the answers. After that, I working with my city manager at the time, I really was encouraged by that. I actually then went into city management myself, and some of my duties in the communities I went to, I was the clerk, statutory clerk. And in Wisconsin, we know clerks run elections at the local level. All 1,850 communities have a clerk. And so that's where I got my love of running elections, training poll workers, doing all I could to help people to vote, going above and beyond. I was also a clerk during the pandemic, and I remember going into nursing homes and trying to help folks vote absentee, and just seeing sometimes how easy and how hard it is to vote. And it was really after the 2020 election. I was working in a community, and my staff and I, due to misinformation, due to disinformation after the 2020 election, we received death threats virtually, over the phone, in person. For a month after the election, my staff and I had to have police escort us to our cars. The community that I lived in provided police protection for a little while. I had to get cameras, and it was really, for the first time in my life, I thought, maybe public service isn't for me if my family and my children are being threatened. And that's really what sort of then drove me into what I'm doing now in the nonpartisan voting space, working with Republicans, working with Democrats, anyone that will listen, on ways to lower the temperature, on ways to make it easier for people to vote, whether it's early voting, mail-in ballots, curbside voting, all those really fundamental things that help ensure that every eligible voter has the right to fully participate in our democracy. And so, you know, honestly, I could probably tell you that, I thought by the time when I turned 40 this year, I thought I'd be a congressman or a state senator or the lieutenant governor or something by now. But, we all can't be, Michael Jordan in this space. Some of us got to be, helping with the assists and working on the sidelines and warming the bench to help the stars. But there's a lot of ways to participate in democracy, in elections, in voting, and ensuring that we have what we have. I think Governor McCallum said it well. I mean, I think a lot of us take for granted the right to vote. And this past election, yeah, we still had pretty high turnout. Wisconsin's turnout was higher than 4 years ago, but we still had 90 million Americans, eligible voters, who didn't turn out. And we need to ask ourselves why that is. And is it because they're having a tough time accessing the ballot box? Is it because of the partisan rancor? And so there's a lot of ways to get involved to encourage our fellow neighbors to get involved. And so I'm proud to be on this panel and with these colleagues, many of who I work with on a daily and weekly basis. So that's a little bit about my story and how I got here. And I think with that, I'll hand it off to Edgar.
Thanks, Sam. So what inspired me to enter the pro-democracy sphere was I actually grew up in an authoritarian country. I grew up in Taiwan, which we think of it now as like a free, which it is. It's a democracy. It's the only Chinese democracy in the world. So my father was an economist who was recruited in a democracy movement in the 90s. His mentor, who passed away last year, was one of the movement leaders. He spent 25 years in prison. He started a democracy study group. I can post a link about the New York Times wrote something about him after his passing. He was tortured. He refused to be released until he is granted a full pardon. And when he was released, he kind of, he was trying to look for scholars and people to help form this new party. And my dad got recruited. And when my dad got recruited, he brought me to all the meetings, which was very boring at the time, but kind of insightful now. But so that was kind of what I grew up with. And then we look at fast forward now in America and the world actually, is that in 2010, 48% of the world live in an autocracy. 10 years later, that 48% now is 68%. In 2020, 68% of the world live in an autocracy. And so there is there's a democracy recession happening in the global sort of sphere, and America is not immune. And so looking at what has been going on in this country for the last 10 years, a country that I've naturalized in when I was younger, it's just deeply sad. And someone like my father is very saddened by it because he was very much just America cheerleader all the way as the beacon of freedom and the beacon of democracy. And that is starting to shift a little. And so in terms of our work in our org, to improve democracy, our mission is to prevent our democracy from declining into a more authoritarian form of government. And authoritarianism isn't it comes from the left, right? Like it comes from the left in South America, it comes from the right in Eastern Europe. And so like it is not necessarily a left-right issue. This is why we kind of look at the problem as authoritarianism and liberal democracy issue. And so we're cross-ideological, nonpartisan as well. And we have staffers from both senior staffers who work for Republican members of Congress to Democrat members of Congress. And what we do is we try very hard to protect elections, defend the rule of law, counter disinformation, and help think about what a better democracy could look like in the future. And so we have all these. We're about 140 people working on different aspects of this. And I think the work, like Sam said, folks here, we work alongside to build this broad pro-democracy coalition so that we can still have a free society. And so this is why I got into this work. I've seen it firsthand. Democratic backsliding is the new, it doesn't, in the past, there was a point in time in which a tank rolled up and took over a country. But today it's much more subtle, it's slow, it's institutional, eroding trust. And so that's what we're working on or fighting against. And I'm privileged to be in this position and to be with all the fine people here.
Thanks so much, Edgar. Bouncing it to Peter.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, really great to hear everyone's background here. It is really inspiring. Like I said, I'm relatively new to doing this line of work. I did civic engagement work and public interest work beforehand, doing a lot of grassroots organizing and advocacy work, but not directly working on voting rights issues or election administration and election law and policy. So this is relatively new to me, and it has been a really exciting learning experience for sure. So like I mentioned, I finished graduate school in 2022, and that was kind of a good moment to reset and figure out what I wanted to do next. A lot of my work beforehand had focused on climate and environmental policy, which is really important and matters to me personally a lot. But I was kind of trying to figure out, do I want to continue doing that type of work, whether it's at the federal level in some form or fashion, or doing regional climate organizing, for example, or do I want to challenge myself and go in a different direction? What are the big issues that the country is facing at the moment, and where I could apply myself and like Nathan was saying too, kind of apply the privilege that that I had coming where I come from, and with the education that I'd had and the experience that I have. And so I think no matter what you think about the election results in 2020, there were a lot of people who were questioning where our democracy was heading and just didn't trust the outcome. And so, like everyone here has mentioned, there's backsliding that's happening. And so it seemed like working on election policy, building trust in elections, voting rights was going to be a really, really key issue for the country, not just leading up to the 2024 election, but beyond, right? I mean, we're all still here, and I think we all feel like this is work that has to happen in the long run to rebuild trust and get people engaged in our democracy. And so that's the direction that I wanted to go in. And I really appreciated doing state level work beforehand. That's something that I still care really deeply about, and I'm excited to be able to do state legislative work now. There's so much that happens at the state level, as I think everyone who's here can tell you. And I love working in coalitions, doing relationship building work and coalition building work, getting to work alongside a lot of the groups and the folks who are on this call. That was important to me beforehand, and I still get to do a lot of that now. So yeah, this was the job that I was excited to do. I felt called to do this type of work, and I'm excited to be here. So that's how I got into doing democracy related work.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that insight. We're going to move on to our second question now. This one is a little bit more tailored to the undergraduate students who are here, who are looking for some insight. What advice would you give to students or people in general seeking a career in civic engagement, democracy strengthening, or civil discourse? What is crucial to know in 2025 regarding this line of work?
I would also add that, as we mentioned in this call too, it doesn't need to be your career to be impactful in civil service and civil society in general. So if you also have any tidbits about like how to use some of your spare time to benefit this space, or what sort of advice just to enter this sort of really, really quickly growing space in American politics over the past few years. So, yep, any insight would be helpful, but it was originally designed as a job talk. So if you have any career specific things. Also, when it comes to what's crucial to know in 2025, do we have any like mantras that we're repeating to ourselves of like how to stay sort of cool and collected during this time could be helpful. So starting with Mary Beth again.
Yeah, well, I'll just remind folks that I work at a university. I teach some undergrad courses. I teach a lot of graduate level courses. And I'm working on civic health. So my responses are going to be kind of based on that orientation. And then I'll let my more direct democracy folks add in more to complement that. So first and foremost, I would just say that all of us should be thinking about being participants in democracy or pro-democracy outcomes through a civic health lens, which opens up a lot of different possibilities than only working directly on like legal things or politics or democracy. So some of the metrics that we think about through civic health is how educated and prepared are people to participate in democracy. And in Wisconsin, we don't have a civics education requirement in our public schools, not to the level that many other states have. So just one example is you might be thinking about becoming a teacher. That actually could be one of the most like democracy promoting things that a person could do. So just to kind of open up our minds to the various ways that we can support democracy from a very broad, diverse ecosystem kind of perspective. In terms of career and also our individual participation just as community members. So one of the things that we're going to be putting out soon from our Civic Health of Wisconsin initiative is the 2024 Civic Health of Wisconsin report. And we'll be able to share more points about like how is Wisconsin behaving when it comes to civic health. But along with that, I really want to get out a recommendation for everyone to establish civic health habits. So this is something that like, regardless of your work, even if you're at home right now with like 3 small children, or you're in college, or you are retired, or you name it, everyone through this like network theory of all of us pushing the levers that we have across our communities can and must contribute to pro-democratic outcomes in our communities. And that can be customized to what you're comfortable with. So I know people that are like, I wouldn't be caught dead knocking doors. And I know people that are like, I don't have a penny to give in a donation format, but the person that doesn't want to knock doors can give some money, and the person that can't give money might be willing to knock doors. And there's a million other things in between, including various volunteer roles, being conscious about having discussions with family members that have different views than you in a constructive manner. So I'll be publishing more about what some civic health habits can look like, but I would encourage everyone here to think about what their spheres of influence and their comfort level is, even in just their daily lives, to flex the muscles that they have to be part of this broad-based thing that we need to make happen in this country and the world right now. With regard to especially students right now and everyone, one civic health habit I would encourage everyone to do is to have a routine. I do it every morning. I've been doing it for years, where I have like 12. You don't have to do 12. You could do 3. You could do 2. But I have like 12 tabs of trusted media sources that I know have journalistic standards. And I start my day looking at those headlines, because what I don't want is for an algorithm to dictate what I give my attention to and the way that I hear and understand that story. And that is something that we all have to really be aware and real about, the vulnerabilities that we all have in that. And so I have also diversity of like quote unquote bias in my 12 tabs. So I won't name the names because I don't want to like create an association if one of them is not your favorite, but like I try to read across the spectrum. And I think even if you're going to read one news source a day, have one that you actually go to, that you're not just waiting for an algorithm to push a story at you. And if you can, pay for a local or national or other news source that you know is a viable news source. And students can often do that for like a couple of bucks a month. It's really meaningful right now because media and that landscape is just a huge factor in how this is all going to go. If you'd like to know more about this, we can connect offline. But with regard to career, what I always say to students is that you should think about your career as more of a portfolio, and you should be comfortable with what I call like lily pad jumping. So jump to the first lily pad that you feel like can meet your basic needs. I mean, I told you I was a single mom for my entire career and pre-career education too. So I've always had to have the practical considerations in mind of like, is this a viable thing that will pay my bills and that I can raise my kids and be around my kids while I do this job, you know? So those things are real, and we have to be very honest with ourselves. Like, we can't all have the dream like content job right away. But if you take jobs that you think you can perform well in or decently and learn something new that you think has value for your future portfolio, it's okay to take that and then gauge how it's going and then look for the next opportunity. And I guarantee you, if you do that earnestly, you will learn what the next lily pad jump is with a lot better knowledge than you had before. And I think the most interesting careers are the ones where there's a few jumps like that. And it helps you hone your understanding of your real authentic interests and skills in a way that, like, I think sometimes has to be done in an applied fashion. I know there are people that want to be pediatricians and then become pediatricians, and that's what they do their whole life. But most of us, I don't think, I'm not like that. And so I really relate to this thing of needing to try things. And then finally, the thing that I would leave people with is that I'm sure many of my colleagues on this call can relate, but I think about it pretty clearly now, and I never have done something that I think was something that I regret. But I would think about, like, which things do you want to do as a volunteer, and which things do you want to like show up on your resume? So I have many friends that are in like partisan political roles, and they are rocking their careers with that, and that is great for them. But I'm leading a Civic Health of Wisconsin initiative right now, and I think that, like, if my resume showed too much partisan stuff, maybe I couldn't really be in that role, and that might be okay. It's just that I would think about like what your comfort level is, especially in these times, with which parts of you that you want to give to like certain causes or certain partisan things as a volunteer, which is your own business, and like which things you want to be your professional path. And then continue to interrogate yourself about what role am I in the job or the board member role or the volunteer role that I'm in, and be okay with like some diversity across that, but have clarity in the given thing. So those are my tips.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mary Beth. That was so insightful. I was taking notes. Love it. All right. So next we are going to hop over to Nathan.
Thanks, Mary Beth. You're a tough act to follow, but you also gave a helpful format, which I'm going to try to follow. The first is just to pick up on Mary Beth's first basket of advices, which is what can you do in your daily life? Everything she said was brilliant. The one thing I would add, and I've just dropped an article in the chat, you could all read, is to think about your social networks. And in this era of loneliness and social isolation, be intentional about fostering relationships in real life with people who are geographically proximate to you. If you're a college student, that's maybe people in your dorm room. You live in a suburb, it's your neighbors in the suburb. This article, just as an example, highlights the paucity of that network of relationships in American life and all the other negative implications of that gap. Forgive me for any background noise. I fractured a toe last night, so I'm in my 8-year-old daughter's bedroom, laid up with my foot in a boot. Anyway, so there's a lot you can do in terms of daily life just to help out. Second, in terms of more specific career advice, I'm on my 4th career. My first one was teaching English abroad. I had 4 different jobs from age 19 to 25 teaching English in different countries. I was pretty sure I wasn't going to make that a long-term career, but to Mary Beth's point, that was the lily pad jump that I could take to get me making a living, not in the United States of America, which is what I wanted. And it eventually, opened the door to other things. So, especially for folks in undergrad, don't beat yourself up if the job you get is something you don't think is going to be the thing you do forever and ever. That's just part of the journey. Two more specific suggestions. If you want to pursue an international track, there are jobs there, right? There are jobs in this broad world of international development. You can get a job advising the Parliament of Azerbaijan or doing hydrology work in Ethiopia. Like, there's like a jillion things to do. under this broad rubric of projects funded by donor governments, including our government. That's a whole world unto itself. It is possible to jump from that world to working on conflicts in the United States. It's hard to do because there are a lot fewer jobs resolving conflicts and strengthening democracy in the United States of America than there are outside of our country. So it can be done, but it's challenging. In terms of just more domestic career tracks, I mean, I think Sam and others on this call can speak to it, but there is definitely a track. If you've worked in party politics, you've run for office, there are orgs now that didn't exist 10 years ago that are taking people with political campaign experience, and instead of getting them to, gin up votes for one party or the other, are turning those skills towards strengthening the system of democracy. So that's worth looking into. But I mean, the last thing I'd say is just to be encouraging. Like, America needs help. We need all kinds of people, young, old, black, white, brown, like liberal, conservative, like we need all hands on deck. And I just want to encourage people to find ways to engage. And to the last prompt, what should we be doing in 2025? How do we think about 2025? I would say, look, on the one hand, the situation is not great. Like, I think the risks to the health of our democratic republic are more serious than most people recognize. On the other hand, the future is unwritten. What happens to our country, what happens to our democracy is what we decide. It is based on the actions that we take or inaction, right? So I don't believe that any of this is set in stone yet. I still believe that Americans, many Americans, all of us, can do things to make this better. But I'll pass it on from there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Believe next up we've got Sam.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, all this talk of democracy has got me thinking about one of my political heroes, Winston Churchill. And right now there's a great Netflix documentary out there, so if you have a chance, check it out. But when he talks about democracy is the worst form of government except for all others. And there's no better argument against democracy than a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. And both of these things are true, but also at the same time, it's funny, but also at the same time, democracy is the best form of government that we have invented so far. And so, with that in mind, just some of the advice I would say to folks is, when you're looking possibly into this career, into these types of careers that you've heard about today, I think also some of us started locally. I'd say engage locally. While it's easy to focus on these big national issues and all the news that's coming out of DC and the world these days, many opportunities to make a difference really do happen right at the local level. Volunteer at the local community org, assist in voter registration drives, attend public meetings to understand how government works. These experiences really will help you see that the direct impact. One of the most rewarding things I ever did was serving in city council. So it's so easily accessible. I mean, there's many times where I would come home and there'd be someone waiting in my driveway, or I'd be dinner time and someone would ring the doorbell and just show up and want to talk to me. So the further up you get in government, the harder it is to directly talk with your elected officials. So local is, I think, a way to go. Also getting involved in campus, joining student orgs, student government, model UN, local political groups. These are great ways to develop and hone leadership skills. Definitely, I would say internships matter. They open a lot of doors. It's important of what but sometimes, it's who or it's dumb luck. Sometimes, honestly, how you can fall into these. And so the more you're engaged, the more people that you network with, networking is great. I think LinkedIn is a great place to be if you're not professionally. Be informed, stay curious, understanding the rapidly changing landscape that we live in. What's news yesterday is not news today. Stay informed about current events, legal changes, the impact of technology on our civic life. Also don't be afraid to start small. Your first job, like has been said here a few times, it might not be glamorous, but it will be meaningful, whether it's organizing events or working on a campaign or assisting election administration is a poll worker. Every step contributes to a larger goal, and it makes our democracy stronger for it. The more you're engaged and the more you become a part of the process. And so I would just say, democracy is it's a marathon, right? It's not a sprint, and this all requires persistence, patience, and the belief that your efforts, no matter how small they are, do matter. It all adds up. It's the old adage, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So I guess with that, I'll leave it there and pass it off to Edgar.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, there is a lot of wisdom out by my fellow panelists. I don't know if I could squeeze anything else out, but when it comes to students, I think broadly speaking, you've heard of people talk about international experiences. I think that's good. If you have the opportunity, if it's practicable, study abroad, broaden your horizon. You're going to see how other people live, what kind of viewpoints they have, even more so. And so I think that that's a good thing. Everything that Sam said, and people have said about, getting opportunities, being, I think democracy, politics, anything like that is about showing up, just being there. Go to your local meeting, whether it's local elected official, whatnot. Go into nonprofits, whether you're working for nonprofits or for political campaigns, all that stuff, grassroots. In terms of navigating the next few years, I think actually we have a little guide of 29 actions that one could take, and I'll post it here. It mentions about getting news source, invest in your local news, invest in your national news, pay for the subscriptions, because God knows there's a lot of misinformation, disinformation out there. And so I'm not going to go through the whole 29 points, but there's a lot there. But that's good because you could pick a few things that you'd like to kind of look at, or something that fits your personality. And then when it comes to just how do we digest the news that's coming or the policies that are coming, we thought about certain things we could look at. One is the action tangible, actionable, and detailed, or intangible, abstract, or vague. Like Greenland, that's vague. I don't, there's no a theory of change or steps to get there. I mean, maybe there is, but I mean, I see that as something vaguer. When you think about our federal employees, right, and the dismantling of our federal employees, that's more tangible. There's an entire, group now that's monitoring this. So we think about another thing to look at is, does this policy cause irreparable harm to real people? Does this action target the opposition in a way that may cause anticipatory obedience? That is, people or businesses are fearful of what a powerful person would do, and they comply before even being told to do so. And does this entrench the authoritarian faction in power and make it more difficult to dislodge? Because these are steps that in other countries they've taken, right? Dissolve the legislature, or tell the courts to check the court's power, things like that. Those are real things, and they're very damaging. So I'll leave it at that, and I will pass it to Peter.
Thanks, Edgar. Yeah, well, I wish you all had been my career advisors in undergraduate. I think you all have really checked off most of what's on my list, and Sam in particular. I was going through my list here, and you mentioned pretty much every single thing that I was going to say as well. So I really don't have too much to add. I think just yeah, volunteer, intern, find something that brings you joy, that energizes you. I really appreciate what Nathan mentioned too about the importance of trying to be with people in person as much as you can too. I think there are definitely some benefits to kind of what happened with the pandemic, and a lot of opportunities being virtual now, that there's internships or volunteer opportunities that you can do without being physically in the same space as people are. But I think what much of the pandemic experience taught me too is that doing work that that's kind of in this public interest sphere and that relies on relationships is just so important to have physical contact with people as well and to be in community and in fellowship with people too. So I think that was a really important point, Nathan. I think just a couple other things that popped into my head as I was listening to others. I wish someone had told me during undergraduate that state and local work is really, really important and impactful. When I was doing undergraduate work, the focus was very much on the federal level and national government and Congress and the presidency and agencies, and that's what was exciting and interesting to folks. But state and local government is so important and so impactful. And like Sam said too, I mean, there's so much that happens at the local level, and that's certainly what I've seen personally and what I've fallen in love with too is doing work kind of at those levels of government. Also, I'm glad that I waited to go back to graduate school. I had a break of about 8 years between undergraduate and graduate school, which was a really helpful experience to just gain professional experience, life experience, a better understanding of what the questions were that I needed to answer for myself, what the things were that I knew and that I didn't know about how to make change in the world. And so I think if you can take some time between undergraduate and graduate school and get some life experience, meet some people, and take all of that experience into the graduate work that you want to do. Yeah, last thing I'll say is there's so many great organizations, including those on this call, but then plenty of others too that you can volunteer with. I mean, the League of Women Voters does incredible work registering people, monitoring elections, training poll workers. Sign up to be a poll worker if you want to see how elections work firsthand. And like others have mentioned too, there's democracy work is very broad. There's lots of different issues that you could work on. It doesn't have to be directly related to elections and election policy and building confidence in the voting process. There's lots of other ways to get civically engaged and to do really important work as well, whether that's environmental or on any other issues. So take advantage of the great organizations that do work here in the state and find ways to get engaged and find things that energize you and make you excited to come back to doing this work.
Thank you so much. I just completely agree with all of the amazing tips and insight that all of the panelists provided, especially Peter, your point about the value of being in person and forming those relationships. You know, those connections are really what's gonna be the driving force for getting democracy, you know, reinstated and back kind of on its feet. Now we're gonna take some time to take some student questions. I saw one earlier from Jocelyn asking, do all of the panelists' orgs have opportunities for volunteer opportunities, maybe remote? I saw that a couple panelists put their contact information, including David and Scott, for some WisACT work. Anyone else in the call, feel free to, if you have any connections to any orgs that need volunteers or have volunteer opportunities, feel free to drop that in the chat. Now I'm gonna take a second. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to drop that in the chat as well, and we will read those off.
Yeah, you can send one over in the chat or feel free to raise your hand or unmute as well. I also just wanted to highlight, we have our 5 lovely panelists on this call that gave amazing advice. And there are also no shortage of other people on this call that have their own experiences and their own advice. So if you're sitting in this call right now, like I see Jamie Crofts and Brittany Vulich dropping their messages, they both work with All Voting is Local and are also amazing resources. So if they would like to share their contact info, they're great people to reach out to too. And yeah, just to echo what folks said, I think in my experience too, the most important thing is showing up and giving your time and being your authentic self and showing people what you can do and what sort of work can be helpful is the most important thing. But yeah, I'll give the floor to students or folks who have questions. I see Rebecca's hand up.
Hi, my name is Rebecca. Thank you so much for this amazing panel. A question that I wanted to ask was about, and you guys kind of touched on this, so take it as you will, but what are some strategies in navigating democracy within a political trifecta like we are living through in the US? So we're kind of like all GOP. It's not really like a political question at all. It's just more of like, the US has lived through trifectas before, but in this administration or these next years that we're going through, how and what kind of strategies are you employing?
Peter and Mary Beth, I see you would like to jump in.
Sure, that's a great question, and something that I've learned from doing this work is how much happens at the state level. Sorry to be a broken record about this, but so much of elections policy, of democracy issues, voting rights happens at the state level and to an extent at the local level too. So although there's a lot happening nationally that I think a lot of us on this call are concerned about, like Edgar was mentioning too, it's important to focus on where a lot of these decisions are made, and in many cases that's at the state level. And there's a lot that we can do at the state level to strengthen the way that voting works, to strengthen whether it's security and the protections in the system, voter access, and getting people to turn out to vote. So I think that's my hopeful note, is that there's a lot happening at the national level. That's where a lot of attention is, a lot of media attention is as well. But there's a ton that happens at the state and local level, especially on elections policy, that is very impactful for how our elections work in practice.
Oh, Mary Beth, I think you're still muted.
Thanks. Yeah, I would just kind of underscore a general principle that I think a lot of us are thinking about a lot right now, which is that anyone that has been elected to represent you as a constituent, like, you should be looking at what they're doing and holding them accountable for whether or not depending on how you think about it, whether they've done the thing they said they were going to do, or whether they're doing the thing that's good for you and your community per your perspective. And yes, of course, there's probably people if you think about everyone from your like city council representative all the way up to the president of the United States, I suspect there's some people in that chain that are like more like-minded to you, where you just want to be sure you're talking to them about advocating for the things that you might already agree on. But you also can express yourself towards those that you think won't agree, because I think it's important that everybody still, for now, has to be reelected. And so the more that we can build a voice across the communities and constituencies about what matters to people on real issues, through especially young people that have social media presence and things, I think like there's still a lot of opportunity there. And I think, there's a lot of questions right now at the federal level, which is where everybody's attention is going, not to take away from the local point, because I totally agree with that. But there's a lot of questions right now about how things are really going to unfold. And I think that people staying present and paying attention and voicing what they think about the things that they see happening is really, really important, maybe more than ever, because it's not really falling according to like organized, traditional political theory lines. And so, the more that regular folks can just make sure they're voicing their concerns or their support for things and expressing how it directly affects them. And I hesitate a little bit on this because I don't really want to see social media just become like the, saturated environment that we know it can be. So I would encourage that use that, I guess, if it works, for you, but also do that by like connecting with organizations that support those issues that you want to focus on. You can't do everything. So pick the issues that you care about, hold those officials accountable for those issues by connecting with other organizations and people. And if you feel comfortable, maybe even talking about those issues with people that don't see it the way that you do, but who would still be constituents that would vote in the next election. So that maybe that there can be some discourse there, which can be hard. And there's a lot of tools we could offer for that. But those are my thoughts right now, is we just need to not stop paying attention. Although I know people also have to gauge like how healthy they need to be and what works for them. But with all those caveats, that's my advice.
Awesome. Sam, did you want to add anything?
I think mostly what I was gonna say was covered, but I think, yeah, there's a lot of noise out of, our nation's capital. Um, and that's right. I mean, the cable news industry, the podcasts, they all make money based on, your clicks and the algorithms. And, the more, preposterous it is, right? The more money they try to make. So I'd say, really, yeah, filter through what was said earlier. But I think Mary Beth talked about, subscribing or even buying, into credible media, supporting them. And then also, yeah, not to be a parent, but also I think Peter spoke well. I mean, there's so much at the state level that the Constitution it gives the states, and right now election things like voting rights and election administration is mostly left to the states. I've had some talks with Republicans in Wisconsin, about what do you think about the new president and new Congress passing more election laws, and they said no, 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 like we want to keep election administration in the states. We know Wisconsin, what works for one state doesn't work for here, and so I think there'd even be some pushback from the majority party, his own party. But also too, we've been here before with trifectas. Democrats have had them, Republicans have had them. And I would even say that the trifecta, the Republicans have a 2-seat majority in the House and a 3-seat in the Senate, maybe technically kind of 4 if you consider a tied vote with the vice president. But everything's not going to be a rubber stamp. There are a lot of legislators and like-minded people that I think are hopefully going to legislate correctly. And that's I think everything Mary Beth said. Just staying involved, advocating, being engaged. If they don't hear from you, they assume your silence is acceptance or complicity in what's happening. And so either way, no matter what the party, what the issue, to stay engaged, write emails, phone calls, and just stay involved.
Can I add a really short thing? Is this is more abstract level, but I think the key here is do not let the pro-democracy coalition fracture, and that there has to be an opposition in the end, right? That is a pro-democracy force. If you look at the example of Poland, where they had I think the Law and Justice Party, which is an authoritarian kind of party, the pro-democracy coalition came together. It was a coalition of left-leaning, centrist, and center-right people came together and voted out an authoritarian faction. So I think that's important to keep in mind. And so, yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much. Those were such great answers to the question that was posed. I see David Blaska has your hand up. Do you have a question for the panelists?
I do indeed. And I'm going to try to be as provocative as I can, as Governor McCallum might attest. Have any of you young people ever spoken up or had an occasion to speak up on campus to protect the rights of conservative speakers? Thank you.
I can answer this question. In my experience, Madison is a campus that has, it does like an okay job of protecting free speech.
Not according to FIRE, but go ahead. Freedom of information, freedom, FIRE is the acronym. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
The events that I have observed with more like right-wing speech, especially like in instances of outsourcing speakers to come to campus, there hasn't really been a shortage of that on the conservative side, and usually they have high turnout, and those events are held in campus buildings. So from what I've observed, the conservative side of speech on campus and discourse is pretty well protected, which isn't always the case with political discourse in the form of protest on campus.
I think, yeah, just adding to what Lydia said, I think the real tension that exists on UW's campus specifically is the relations between students, how we talk to each other, and how we relate to each other on our ideologies and political ideas. When it comes to the legality of the university allowing a registered student organization to invite their own speaker to campus, that's pretty consistent policy across the board. When it comes to things like grading practices, we have heard personal testimonies from conservative students who have dissented a little bit from Madison's overall culture. But I feel like when we talk about First Amendment issues, there's the legality of it, and then there's how people socially respond, and those things are different. And I don't know, I think as a student, something that has been really helpful is to be curious to those who don't believe the same things as you do, but also recognizing that we do operate at a university that has a certain political culture, not necessarily baked into the faculty, but baked into the students sometimes, as a nature of being in a more liberal area and having younger folks attending the school.
Well, the University of Wisconsin, I guess the boundaries of that are not the city of Madison, though. I disagree with your point about the faculty. But the students, I think, especially, you have a large contingent of foreign students, which I think is to the good, and also from other states. So I think the student body may be more cosmopolitan politically than the faculty. But thank you for your answer.
I'd love to just jump in from the academic staff perspective on that campus. A couple of things I'll note is that I think your concern, Mr. Blaska, has been out there, now for some time. And the establishment of the Thompson Center, for example, is one institutional thing that has occurred that actually ensures, with a certain amount of funding, that there will indeed be conservative speakers on campus.
Yeah.
Similarly, the La Follette Institute has made a really big effort to make sure that when they do their keynotes, that it's maybe alternating, but it seems to me like it's even been a little bit more towards maybe alternating across sort of like ideological sides of the spectrum. And they actually require their students to go. And then, I think there are some really earnest efforts that are informed by educational pedagogy about constructive dialogue in the classroom, like the discussion project. One of the leading scholars on that is actually promulgating those kinds of strategies on campus. So I totally hear you that there's probably statistics or evidence that would suggest that it's not a hospitable environment to certain perspectives, but I also want to just attest that in my years of being there, the push towards intellectual diversity has been pretty noticeable.
I'm happy to hear that. My only point here is, I think it's being missed a little bit, is that all the speakers here and the purpose of this organization is to do just that. So I'm hopeful that each of you as individuals will encourage that dialogue. And I try to do that from my side, because a lot of my people, if you disagree with them, you're an idiot, or you're a communist, or you're, da 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 da. So I try to encourage that. But thank you.
Yeah, I feel very fortunate to be involved with WisACT right now, while also being on campus. That's something that Allison and I have been pursuing a lot, is going out into the student communities and building up those skills of having that hard, like, cross-partisan dialogue. And I know for me, I've used it in my real life, during the holidays, and in my political theory classes, and my gender and women's studies classes, when I'm having discussions with people who have different views than me. So yeah, it's so
There are conservatives in your gender studies class?
there are, yeah.
Okay.
So right
All
now,
right.
yeah.
But I think this speaks to what Edgar was saying earlier, is like not allowing the pro-democracy movement to fracture. Don't let somebody's partisan identity or where they're coming at ideologically. If there's someone who believes in democracy, in peace, and in civil conversation, there's a lot of bridges that can be built between different folks, and we have to center that as our number one priority. That's what we do at WisACT. And as we're running up on time, I just wanted to thank everyone for coming today. Thank you for asking the tough questions, David Bosco. We could always count on you to do that, but we're here to answer and ask hard questions. And I'm so grateful for all of our panelists, for Lydia for doing a lot of the organizing on this event. I thought she did a great job. And yeah, our panelists are not only knowledgeable, but they're friendly and awesome people who WisACT has loved to work with over the past year or so. So feel free to reach out to them. Some of them drop their contact information. And stay on the lookout for this video on our YouTube channel. It'll be available to all of our members, but we'll be sending you all the link. I wanted to thank you all for giving an hour and a half of your Wednesday to us. And stay tuned for more WisACT stuff, but feel free to stick around as well if you have any questions for Lydia or myself, or maybe David and Scott will stick around for a couple minutes as well. But everyone stay warm if you're in Wisconsin. If you're somewhere warmer, I'm jealous. And yeah, just stay tuned for more WisACT stuff. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. And to the panelists, thank you so much. You made it so easy to organize, and I definitely will be reaching out to you more because you all are such interesting people. So thank you and good night.
Night,
Okay.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody.